Oh, no, never. That'll be the day.
Did you grow up in Illinois?
I did.
Where?
Downstate, about 45 minutes northeast of Champaign. So I grew up on a farm.
In what city?
Went to school in a little town called Hoopeston.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet corn capital of the world.
I used to live in Bloomington.
Oh, yeah, okay. So then I worked for, I got a degree in journalism, worked for the CBS affiliate in Champaign, which Peoria market actually covers Bloomington, but we were higher rated in Bloomington, so I had a lot of work out of Bloomington for sure as part of the coverage area. So Indianapolis weather is almost identical to Central Illinois, except it's like 2 hours later.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Illinois is basically 3 states. Chicago, everything above north of I-80, and then everything below 70, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's true.
3 different cultures.
let me
Well,
do
I
that.
thought it starts till 10:45, we're all right.
Oh, I thought it was 10:30.
Oh, wait, you might
It
be
is
right.
10:30, that's what I was like. I'm gonna go
You got
quick.
9 minutes.
I'm gonna go quick.
Can I get you anything? Yeah, I just thought I'd sit here and read it while I'm bored. So, will you, is your goal to work for NASA, permanently?
Hopefully,
Good.
perhaps. We'll see. Ultimately, I'm kind of learning that you can't treat your plan for everything because you kind of see what God has planned for you.
That's so true.
So,
I have 4 of you, and one of them lived in Huntsville, did Teach for America right after college, and it was an amazing, interesting city of like high and low. Reminded me of like Mexico City, you have like the uber wealthy, and then Jeff Poverty.
yeah, you go to a large swath of
Yeah.
folks. But it's because it's, there's so many people that come there and it's become a really great spot. Because it's a city, there is a level of poverty. And because I'd say that there's been a large amount of people who move there from everywhere. Because it's an international city.
Right.
International airport. And with that comes its unique challenges. There is an even hustle with the city for lower income people dealing with severe poverty in that area. And then you also have, like you said, some more high
Right.
so it's a mixed crowd. But it's less, despite that unique mix and being a city, it's not as dangerous as like Birmingham is.
Oh no, it seemed really safe and friendly. Everybody's nice.
It's really nice. But we got a homeless camp now, like an establishment. They made specifically for them. But that's like a mezzanine slab and whatnot, which was a nice idea and good because there is a community of people in our midst that are dealing with that. So I really like it there, and I hope to stay there regardless of what that looks like for So is everybody else in your case, most of your family in Texas?
Everybody but one. Yeah.
This is not my norm. This month I'm living
Kids
in
and
Florida.
wives
It's
and
not my norm.
grandkids.
I live in Virginia.
One
So
lives in
I was
Boston.
we have an office in
One couple and their
Fort Myers.
kids.
So I'm in Lewisburg for the last week.
Oh, thank you.
Return there tomorrow.
Yeah, as a man.
Yeah, I'm an East Coast gal.
Yes, you got 4 kids.
I grew up in Maitland, which is just north of Orlando, and it's only Florida people understand the difference between West Coast and East Coast. Yeah.
You made it.
How about that? Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. It's awesome. Well, so I've been in Virginia almost my entire life, except 7 years.
So are you enjoying retirement?
Yes, I am. I'm really just transitioning. I worked for 5 more years, but I'm just doing fundraising now.
Yeah, which is fun.
So much fun.
I was going to go.
That's probably what I'll glide into.
Right, because you know so many
Yeah,
of the
right,
alums.
right, right.
And so I stayed in this area. So saddest reason of all time to get an undergrad, but that was why.
Jean for, I don't
And I
know, so long.
actually,
She's,
I'm with
right,
you.
such
Oh, yeah,
a
she just
great
said hello.
person. Yes, right, yeah.
I love my experience there.
She and Howard are a lot of fun. Good people.
Yeah, right. So she's adjusting to a culture shift too.
Yeah, big one. So you lived in Champaign for a long time.
Okay.
Great.
I did, yeah.
I'm just looking.
Yeah, I'm having control issues. Just let, yeah, I won't, unless I say something, we're all good.
Oh, it got quiet because I stood up here. I'll not step here. You don't have to get quiet yet.
Too soon.
Not quite. No, it's Lafayette Company. Lafayette Company. Not Lafayette Group.
Company.
I Googled one time Lafayette Group and something entirely different came up,
Well, she was involved in,
just so I can notice
yeah,
it.
she was involved in litigation because a DC firm
right.
tried to steal her
Tried
name,
to take her name,
a
that's right.
political deal, right? And everybody knew Ellen and her, right? And so it was a little,
Yeah.
well, yeah, now they do. The new iPhones, I'm not used to the new software yet. It's driving me crazy. The new iPhone
Really?
software.
I'm getting mine
I
tomorrow.
must,
Is it
is it
different,
the new
that
phone?
different?
It's like contacts and stuff they put in messages. They like the search box and stuff is in a different place. So it's like, ugh.
Gotta learn it all over.
Now you can opt to, I think, have the
Old
old
version.
version, but yeah, and it looks different, right? Because it's got these glass windows.
Oh, that's
You don't
how
have
it
this
looks now,
issue.
right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it tomorrow morning. I can't wait.
yeah.
My eyes aren't.
Oh, yeah.
Teary.
Any other, like, good things about it?
I have this one, so.
Yeah, so my earbud cracked out, so I went into the new version.
Yeah, you have to go to
Software to have like translate language now, IA. Right. So and
It could be any time, but it would start.
background noise
And then you would be like cartoons or
filtering is
whatever.
incredible.
So anyway, I'm gonna.
So that in terms of I haven't noticed anything, different, but I haven't. I just got so all the normal stuff that I do, other than where little boxes are, I'm like, it looks. It's more intuitive. I just haven't figured out.
Yeah, we have, yeah.
And,
You have to.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh yeah, get used to me when I'm intuitive, but you need to get.
It's intuitive to a 19-year-old, not us, yeah.
It will water.
You gotta figure it out.
Right.
Allergies.
Yes. Isn't that crazy? So,
Pay attention.
Still in Champaign, right?
No,
No,
we moved.
where are you now?
Indy. We're downtown Indy. We moved in '95.
So where's Indy?
Downtown, we were right off the Circle, and then in 2017 we moved to Mass Ave. So we are downtown. Yeah.
We lived in Carmel a long time ago.
Oh,
And
okay.
in Indy before our family got too big.
Well, Carmel has changed.
Oh, it's exploded, yeah.
And it's like a little Disney World. Right.
It's the town of roundabouts.
Oh, that for sure. Which once you get used to it, it's great.
It is great.
It's great. But yeah, I mean, Carmel has so transformed. Well, and all those northern little farm towns
Right.
now are now,
Zionsville, all that.
yeah, Noblesville,
Right.
right? All they are all now full blown suburbs, right?
Where do you live?
I live on the very north edge of Indianapolis, just south of Fishers.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us at the National Press Club to talk about the Brotherhood Blueprint, how restoring authentic, enduring community for men benefits us all. Thank you to the Lafayette Company for helping pull this together. My name is Dawn Weiss. I am a former university vice president, currently serve as chief operating officer of FRMT, and serve on the adjunct faculty at Virginia Military Institute in the Department of Economics and Business. I'll be serving as your moderator today. We have an amazing panel. Happy to introduce them. I'm going to just briefly introduce them, and you all may decide to fill in a little bit more as we get going. First, I want to introduce Cadis Ammons, a graduate student in mechanical engineering at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He also earned his bachelor's degree there. He was an active member of Alpha Tau Omega Fraternity as an undergraduate, and I think he continues some of his activity today. He now works as a research assistant for Dr. Judy Schneider, supporting NASA research on lunar landing pad development. I told him when he and I were talking, I said, this is an exciting time to be in Huntsville. We are also joined by Nikki Williams, a native of Roanoke, Virginia. She is the CEO of Girl Scouts Virginia Skyline Council, which covers the western half of Virginia. She earned her BA and MA at Hollins University, which, as you may know, is a single-sex women's organization, studied education, and during her doctoral studies, studied specifically learning differences in boys and girls. Nikki while she has spent the majority of her career working with women's organizations, she has two sons, ages 15 and 14, so she offers an interesting perspective related to single-sex education, working with women's organizations, and raising two sons. If we were to teach, if we were to have someone teach a master class on higher education leadership, it would be Dr. Vic Boschini, now Chancellor Emeritus at Texas Christian University, transitioned to the role of Chancellor Emeritus in June of 2025, spent more than 2 decades as leader of Texas Christian University, and now continues fundraising, serving as Chief Enrollment Officer, teaching, and as many love in higher education, friend raising. Specifically teaches the American University Experience, as well as a leadership class in the Neely School of Business. Thrilled to have Dr. Boschini with us. And last, Wynn Smiley, a longtime communications expert. He actually began his career as a reporter covering Illinois politics before moving into communications in the fraternal space. He has served as Chief Executive Officer of Alpha Tau Omega for 28 years, and is also chairman of the North American Interfraternity Conference, which is the umbrella trade association for men's social fraternities. So as I think you can see, we have an interesting and diverse panel to talk about boys and men and what's happening with boys and men today. I just want to give just a couple of background facts about what's going on with young men to set the stage. We are seeing young men falling behind in mental health, education, social isolation, addiction. And to give you some stats related to that, 50 years ago, if you were to look at the incoming class of Stanford University, it would have been 67% men, 33% women. Today, women outnumber men at Stanford by 7%. Looking at Harvard, it has had a female majority for its 7th year in a row. And looking at what's going on in mental health issues and addiction, young men today are 3 times more likely to overdose, 4 times more likely to commit suicide, and a staggering 14 times more likely to be incarcerated than their female peers. 98% of all mass shooters are male. So as we think about what's going on with men, starting from as young boys in the classroom to what's happening in colleges and beyond, I think you'll agree that we have an excellent panel to discuss this. So I'd like to start with Wynn, and I think many of you all would have received a copy of an article that just came out in the National Review by Wynn called "In Praise of Fraternities." So Wynn, why do fraternities and brotherhood matter in this conversation?
Yeah, Don, thank you for some of the reasons that you just cited, but let me give 3 broad reasons that I think fraternities are more important for college men than they have ever been. First, the community of young men. So we have seen since the start of the iPhone and certainly social media, and we are all aware of it because we're reading about it all the time, of the lack or the declining amount of interpersonal communication between people. And this is certainly true with boys growing up and going into college in terms of them looking at their devices, communicating with their devices, getting less and less interpersonal communication, which was only exacerbated when COVID hit. So then everything locked down, and depending on where you were in the educational spectrum, first kindergarten to senior in high school, we started seeing in college young men, I call it a kaleidoscope of every semester. It changed a little bit in terms of some of the things that we saw that were different post-COVID than pre-COVID, depending on where they were in high school when everything locked down. And we're still seeing a little bit of that. It's starting to fade, but the kaleidoscope continues to turn. So interpersonal communication is one. Two is the construct of masculinity has changed definition or has sort of evolved or devolved depending on how you look at it. And so if you read Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men, he talks about how boys in education are treated differently, or perhaps want teachers' expectations in many cases are asking little boys, why can't you be more like the little girls? Because the little girls behave, they're not fidgety, all the things that little boys do. And this is one of the insights that Reeves in his book talks about. And so boys are growing up feeling like, and they don't obviously know the word masculinity, but they're not allowed in many cases to act like little boys. That's not to say to let them run wild, of course, but that's an issue. And so when they get to college and in higher education in some cases, and Dr. Buschini can probably talk to this and correct me a little bit, but my observation has been that expectation of masculinity, toxic masculinity, which of course there is something certainly as toxic masculinity, but certainly the vast majority of college men are not toxic. And yet they get that sense, whether that's intended or not, in many cases that's the sense they get. And so they are feeling very marginalized, which I'm not a real big fan of that word because I think it indicates victimhood, and I don't believe that that's the case. But they're coming in, growing up with a very different sense of what it means to be a man, a young man, a boy growing up. And so by joining fraternities, not only do they have the peer-to-peer interaction so they can work some of this out, but they're joining organizations that have been organizations for young men initially since the founding of our country. And so we know college men simply because we've been around a long time. And so we can provide that support and also the education and insight, I think, that helps, sort of take the edges off if there are issues. It's like young men, hey, probably not a good idea to do that. Why don't you think about doing this? And finally, the third major reason is a growing body of research, much of which Dawn has been involved with or has been cataloging, shows definitively what we've known anecdotally for a long time is that fraternity, life in fraternity, being a member of a fraternity chapter increases all kinds of skills that are not taught in a college classroom: leadership, communication, peer-to-peer accountability, just trying to figure things out as young men who are volunteers trying to run this organization with nobody really telling them what to do. They are figuring it out on their own, of course with boundaries and guidelines, but still it's up to them. And I think that helps them not only in their college years mature, but then again, research, Gallup probably being the most known study, shows that these benefits last for a lifetime. So those are the big three reasons I think fraternities, especially today, are very important. I would add one other thing that we're hearing a little bit more about, which is, depending on your politics or your worldview, people are going into their own corners, they're siloing, and fraternity men are more likely to engage people with different worldviews and to be able to communicate and agree to disagree without hating each other, right? So they can have those conversations, and I think the country needs that very much today.
Thank you. I was watching Dr. Buschini as you were talking, and I saw a lot of head nodding. So I'd be interested in your perspective on what Wynn has shared, as well as what you've seen leading a university and continuing to teach.
Oh, I think he's 100% right. I just met the guy, and he's a genius. He's a genius. But yeah, and I think in general, the other thing that young boys have when they're in school, they get a lot of subtle messages that say, don't reach out. And coaches do this a lot to young men and women too, but women overcome it. Young men and college-age men are the most socially awkward people in the world. And example, if you're in a dorm of young women or a dorm of young men, if you're in the dorm of young women and the two women are walking by and they see her alone sitting in a room at her desk, they'll go, why don't you come to lunch with us, come to dinner. You see two boys walking, that other kid could be in there crying in his room, like sobbing. Maybe not sobbing, but they could be crying. They would know he was crying, and they'd go like, hey, let's, and they don't even know he's there, you know? And that's just the difference, because the kid sobbing is taught not to reach out, and the kids that are walking by are taught not to reach out, so nobody reaches out.
Yeah, so expand on that a little bit more when you think about sort of the root causes of this isolation that we're seeing in college-age men.
I think you grow up little and you're taught, it's better nowadays than when I was a kid, way better. You're taught not to do that. It shows vulnerability, and you're taught not to be vulnerable. Coaches especially teach you that in subtle ways. They don't say don't be vulnerable, but you get that message. And just like I think super poor kids, if you are a poor boy, you're taught not to reach too high, because you don't want to be disappointed. You know, and all that bollocks is up, then you end up an 18-year-old in college and you don't know how to act.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to invite the other panelists to chime in. If there's something that occurs to you, I don't want to stop you from chiming in, even if I don't address a question directly toward you. Cadis, recent college graduate, now thinking about your college days more recently, but now as a graduate student, what role do you think universities should play when you think about the supporting male students?
Yeah, I think a lot about how we've mentioned with single-sex organizations and fraternities providing a wonderful role in encouraging guys to speak up, because we've heard multiple times that they don't have the courage to be vulnerable, and having a safe space for guys to kind of talk about that is very needed. So having fraternities encourage organizations that do that, also tell male students the opportunities they have available to them. A lot of guys don't know that there is a counseling center, or that there is a group of guys playing football out in the field. So having, I'd say, more open engagement with your students, saying, these are the things available to you and here's how we want to help you. And some of that is a language barrier. Sometimes some words can be a little scary to guys, like the word feelings. So very carefully tailoring to your audience. And then also recognizing that that can be done for both men and women, and both have individual needs that need to be recognized, and universities should recognize that you have a wonderful demographic of students that both need to be served.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Nikki, you're our outlier on the panel. And raising two boys.
Yes.
God bless you.
The two teenage boys.
Yeah.
How do you think male communities support women?
Well, I think it's important that it is reciprocal both ways, for exactly what you just said, that, the world thrives when there's collaboration and when we can really talk about the strengths of everyone at the table. And so it is important that men understand and women understand that we both bring something really unique to the table. And that doesn't mean that one is lesser or one is greater. It means that they're different, and that we can really thrive and uplift everyone and the communities together.
And what are you seeing with your own boys?
Oh my gosh. Well, what I see is that it's really important. Panels like this, discussions like this are important because you got to have advocates, you got to have allies, and that is really where I find that conversations with my boys are not what's happening with everyone. That's not what you hear everywhere. It is exactly what you all said. I think about my oldest in elementary school, the green, yellow, orange about your behavior. And he was always on green and suddenly came home with like 4 days of orange. And so I called and said, hang on, what's happened? And it was a female teacher who said, well, when it's time to go to story time, he's turning circles and he has to do a flip to pick up the pen. And being a boy, And I said, and every time you put him on orange, you're telling him being a boy is not good enough. But if you don't know that and you don't have an ally to have that conversation, what happens is they begin to really internalize that and start to change their behavior. And there's some real value in what they bring to the table. And all of that movement and that excitement, it really is valuable in a lot of ways.
And so you attended a single-sex institution.
I did.
You're leading a single-sex organization. Talk to me a little bit about single-sex organizations, your perspective on those, men's, women's.
Absolutely. I went to a co-ed high school, obviously co-ed all the way from kindergarten through. Never dreamed I would end up at an all-women's institution. Absolutely loved it. Spent 13 years there working, inviting other women to come be a part of it. Again, moved into Girl Scouts, knew that I was going to have girls and this was going to be my life. And as I say, God has a sense of humor. And I got 2 boys. And I love every single second of it. I was meant to be a boy mom. But what I did find out as my boys started growing is that it's different. It's not the same space again, and that's okay to talk about that. And that when we are all in our single gender spaces, we really have an opportunity to grow and thrive in a way that we don't in co-ed spaces. You are less likely to participate and answer a question that maybe you don't have the answer to, that you don't know you're 100% correct in a co-ed environment, because we want to make sure that we are smart enough or not too smart or whatever the case may be for the other person in the room. It really changes the core of who we are, and when we're in a space that feels safe and open and an opportunity to really challenge ourselves and make mistakes, that's when people grow.
And Vic, I'd be interested in your perspective, having led a university for so many years. Make the case for or against single-sex organizations in co-ed institutions.
Oh, I'm all for them, because I think, I totally agree with what you said. And I have 4 of my own that well, they're now a little older, which is good. But I think that men in general make friends geographically. Women make them emotionally. What do I mean by that? Men, especially when you're a young man and you're first married, you have your first house, you make it, your friend is the guy you borrow the edger from, or the guy you see wearing the same t-shirt from the team I love. And then you reach out, but you would never reach out to him and go, hi, how are you doing? That's not what you do. And so in college, since you make friends geographically, I think it's great to have fraternities because they're built in. You even have more empathy, I think, when you're living with them, because you learn. You see the guy crying and you realize that guy needs help. It's just a difference.
Yeah. When you mentioned some of the research in this area, have any of that you want to share related to this?
Well, so I'll start with Gallup, which did a survey of 10,000 young alumni, so from the time that they were 1 year out of college, I think, until 19 years out of college, 10,000 controlled for socioeconomic race, everything that gets controlled for. And what they found was that affiliated, and this was both for fraternity men and sorority women, alumni and alumni, what they found is that Gallup, in measuring 5 areas of thriving, so career, community, physical well-being, financial well-being, and a sense of self, all 5 areas of thriving, and those Gallup defines those. And this is what they do. They measure thriving in societies around the world. George Gallup, this was what he was very interested in, why he really started Gallup. And so they did this same overlay for these young alumni, 10,000 alumni. And what they found is in every single one of the areas of thriving, affiliated alumni outscored unaffiliated by double digits. And so much so that Gallup went back and said, did we make a mistake? And they said, no, we did not, after they looked at their numbers again. And so, I get, of course, parents asking me when their sons are getting ready to go to college, when should, will Billy go check out the fraternity scene? And I would always say, absolutely. And people join fraternities because they have a friend in the chapter, they make a friend during the recruitment process, and I said he may find somewhere he really fits in. And he may not, right? It totally depends. But generally speaking, there's a fraternity where young men can fit in. And so now I say to parents who ask me, you're really doing a disservice to your son if you don't encourage him to at least look at the fraternity scene on campus. Now, they may not choose to go, and that's certainly fine. I'm certainly not into twisting arms for that, but given the research, and this is just one area, that I just think that someone who can find a good fit in a fraternity, and again, I think on the fraternity side especially, that's not a hard thing to do, that they really set themselves up for a lifetime of benefits.
Cadis, recent experiences, anything strike you from what Wynn has shared?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is that the men that are joining fraternities are not the guys going to school thinking they want to join a fraternity. So I really think that puts into perspective why guys are seeking for that so much. They're looking for a place to belong, a sense of purpose, and like we mentioned earlier, that guys make friends geographically. So if you're in an organization where you're forced to get to know everybody, it allows you to have that space to start to be vulnerable. And we start seeing those walls break down, and guys are able to share those feelings that they've been kind of keeping deep inside. So all those positive benefits that we see in the data, you can see emotionally amongst chapters. And it doesn't matter which fraternity or which college you go to, you're going to hear the same thing from most college men. I don't know where I would be without my fraternity. And I'm one of those many guys who can state to that. And every man in my chapter, I've seen so much growth in. And those are the guys that have told me to their face, yeah, I never thought I'd join a fraternity.
Yeah, and I would say overall, so when I speak to chapters or interact with undergraduate chapters, I'll ask that very question. How many of you guys came to campus and had no interest? In fact, not only no interest, but I'm not going to join a fraternity based on what they thought fraternity was in popular media or just stereotypical or stories that they've heard. And typically half or more of the guys in that room raise their hands. And so, Cadis, I see this across the country. That is very typical, and it is absolutely the fact that they see the benefit in making a friend and friends, and the personal development that brings. Yeah, and the social aspect too. Of course, we're not trying to separate ourselves from the social aspect of fraternity. That's part of what it is. Men who join fraternity typically are social. And so that is a part of it, but there is so much more that is very boring and everyday and is not interesting to look at or to watch a show about or anything. But that's really where a lot of the power of fraternity happens in terms of impacting a young man's life.
And I will say that I think that's even more important or going to be more important in the future. So during COVID, I had a second grader and a fourth grader. And if you think about in those ages, when they're younger, the spaces they join are at your church or at your community or in a recreational athletic endeavor, which all were closed. And so what we're seeing now, at least in where we live, is that the numbers of joiners it's just dwindling. And so I think these fraternities and spaces and communities for boys to join are going to continue to thrive and be even more important as those boys age up.
Dr. Bashini, I'm going to just read a little bit about Texas Christian, because what happened there during your leadership is pretty amazing. Not only did you grow the endowment from less than $1 billion to over 2.6 billion, enrollment grew from 8275 in the fall of 2003 to 12,938 in the fall of 2024. So clearly something was working well at Texas Christian University. Talk a little bit from a policy perspective as you think about these questions. What is it that can happen at that leadership level to encourage thriving when it comes to men?
Oh, wow, that's a lot. Could I answer another question first? Because
Sure.
It was something that he said that I think is so true. I think another thing that parents we've done to our kids is we've tried to absolve them of so much responsibility by taking it on ourselves and never letting them fail. For instance, and this, I think, hurts boys more than girls and women less than men when they get older. Guys all the time, when they're drunk, say, I was overserved. You weren't overserved. You drank too much. It's not the bartender's responsibility. Once you're 14, you're old enough to guide your own actions, or you should be. But parents have for so long done this, and so I'm not that smart, so I don't know this word, like infantilize or what, and the boys. And so we let them go with responsibility, and so then they don't take responsibility in other areas either. I don't know if that had anything to do with what we were talking about, but I just had to say that.
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
So that is huge for leaders in national fraternities and for chapter advisors who are working with this. And we talk from the moment that someone joins ATO as a brand new member, they get a video from me talking about several things, but one of them is agency. You now have agency. Let's define what that is. And we talk, and 10 years ago, I didn't talk about agency with undergraduates. Didn't need to.
Yeah.
Now it is like, oh my gosh, really? And I'm like, yeah, you're 18, you're legally a man. You need to start acting like it. And this whole I was overserved or it wasn't my fault or what. Oh, yes, but it was. And so I think that, and this is not just true, of course, with fraternity men, this is true with undergraduate men. But in fraternity, they are held accountable typically by their own peers. Fraternities have judicial boards built into them or some kind of mechanism that the chapter can hold individual members accountable. And they do this with their brothers and friends and all the way to potentially expelling men. So fraternity really does help put a magnifying glass on agency, because guess what, guys? If you don't get this concept of agency, your chapter that you love so much is going to go away, because it's up to you. And if you can't get this or you can't practice it, of course they get it, they're not stupid. If you don't practice this well, then this thing is going to go away, and there's nothing anybody can do about it because it's up to you.
So I want to go back to policy, when we think about policy.
Okay. Sorry.
And no, that's okay. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on this specifically, but I think it's the paradox that we're now in as we think about higher education. I think it's within the last week and a half that the president of Texas A&M stepped down following a confrontation between a student and a faculty member that had to do with what that student felt was a particular ideology happening within the classroom. And that's so, when we think about policy, how do we balance autonomy within the classroom, supporting all of our students? I'll throw it out there, and you can grab it, Dr. Bashini, or anyone else on the panel.
That is the million-dollar question. That is so difficult, because on the one hand, I think it is important in college for you to be in a classroom where you're exposed to these crazy ideas, things you would never agree with. I think that's called college. And then you're on one end, that person is the other, brings you to the middle because you all talk about it. So I don't feel that threatened by some of those kind of ideas. And I don't know what those ideas are, I'm just saying in general. I actually think that could be good for you, but I also think there are limits to everything, and I think we've let go. There are no absolutes anymore, and we've so agreed to make everything situational. Well, it's not all situational. There are absolutes, and I think that we just have to get back to the point where we all, even if you don't agree on them, we agree they're there.
Yeah. So, some successful models, and this could be any one of you. Successful models when we think about single sex. We've touched on fraternity. What's happening within those successful models to support, in particular, young men?
So actually, one of the models that comes to mind to me, other than my fraternity, is my men's small group at church, and also men's devotional for the youth. So I think the big thing there that we're seeing that also goes for the women, they have their own devotional, is a group where you can be vulnerable and you don't have to worry about trying to impress anybody. And whenever you can talk about struggles that somebody can relate to you about. And I think the big thing is accountability in that, right? Because you're meeting with the same people and you build that trust over time. Because that's really what trust takes, right? Is knowing somebody's going to be there the next day. So I think that's the first model that comes to mind of something else that works.
And Vic, you mentioned coaches a couple of times. I think that's a really great place. But I think the challenge in all of these is that it's the right people who understand the implications and what's required to make that a successful environment. So I think any model can be successful if it has, again, the right people, the right understanding, and the right research to back up how they proceed, but even the best environment can also become a challenge or a detriment if we don't understand that. When you said, again, coaches have so much power when you think about athletes and how they proceed and how they grow and develop. And if it's the wrong person in that seat, they can absolutely damage the development of one boy or many who come through over the course of years.
And Nikki, I know this also about Nikki. She knows what she's talking about there, and that she has both been a college athlete as well as a college coach. So she knows a little bit about this from the coaching side as well. Kate, as you talked about sort of values-based support, do you want to build on that a little bit as well from a fraternity perspective?
Well, I think every fraternity has a set of foundational values. So, for example, for ATO, it's Judeo-Christian values, and so ATO was actually formed as a peace organization immediately after the Civil War to help reunite the North and the South. Okay, well, that's a big thought for a 19-year-old who started the fraternity, right? But yet, the values that he put in place.
That's way too deep.
Yeah. The values that, and so it seems as though, that seems relevant still today,
Yeah,
right? Yes. The values that were put in place to help achieve this vision of the founder certainly can be effective for any issue, right? For life. You talk about absolutes, Dr. Bashini. And so there are a foundation of absolutes. And every fraternity, whatever they're founded on, has a foundation value of some absolutes. And when someone joins a fraternity, typically they learn what those are, going through just the education of introduction to the fraternity's history, going through the initiation ceremony, which no fraternity has. For the media out there, when you talk about initiation and hazing and initiation, there is no national fraternity that has any hazing in its initiation ceremony, right? It is typically, and I know ATOs, I don't know anybody else's, but typically.
Yes, you do, because they're all the same.
Okay. Typically, parents were able to sit in back and watch. They'd be very impressed.
Right.
Very impressed with that ceremony, which is also inculcated with values that a lot of these young men have not really, unless they grew up in the church or had some kind of religious training growing up, and we're seeing fewer of those young men come to college. This is the first time that they've really heard of eternal values, whatever those are. And I just think that those then start to, like in ATO, we ask, are you living the creed? Right? Well, that means nothing to anybody else except ATOs. And generally speaking, we're not living the creed, right? Because we're not perfect. But that still communicates a sense of, hey, we have some values here, and how you doing with those?
Yeah, that also indicates there is accountability.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Accountability has come up a couple of times, so I appreciate you all sharing that. And I'll make note that when you talked about the formation of Alpha Tau Omega, that since I teach there, that was at Virginia Military Institute.
Yeah.
So when you think about the kinds of questions that young men were thinking then, I would say that young men continue to think about those kinds of hard questions when we provide environments for them to do so.
Don, can I talk for something that you and I have worked together on, which is communicating to parents of men who are coming to college. So thanks to Don's innovation, we, I don't know, 4 years ago maybe started having a webinar, and also thanks to Zoom, the technology made it possible. We had a webinar with parents of undergraduate members, and in the fall we do our webinar with new members. So parents whose sons have just joined a fraternity. And we go through about an hour of information about the fraternity and ATO specifically and what parents should be expecting, and then we answer a lot of questions. But a couple of things that I I ask parents is, have you had a conversation with your son about hard alcohol? And in many cases, they say no. And I'm like, you need to have that conversation. Just like you had probably the conversation, if you are drinking in high school, don't get in the car and drive. Every parent probably has had that conversation. I'm like, this is a similar conversation you need to have with your son before, because, again, fraternity or no fraternity, students coming to college in many cases are not familiar with the impact of hard alcohol versus what perhaps they had in high school. That's one. Number two, and the research is very clear on this, is that have you told your son your family's expectations for his behavior in college, and parents almost always say, no, he doesn't listen to us anyway. Well, the research says that he does. And so it's really important for parents to tell their son or daughter, certainly, going to college, here are our expectations for you in terms of going to college, whatever those are. And more likely than not, they're going to adhere to those to some level, versus if they're not defined and not communicated, obviously won't, because they won't have a sense of what those are.
And I'll add to that, there is very clear research related to alcohol use and parental expectations and how that plays out in college. And there's now emerging research that the same remains true with hazing and the role of parents, the role of parents in communicating expectations related to not hazing during that college experience. I'm gonna ask each of you to begin thinking about things that we didn't think about, that you didn't have a chance to talk about, and then we'll also open it up to those who are with us today to ask some questions. But let's talk, before we go there, the ripple effects of supporting young men on broader communities. And I saw Cadus nodding his head immediately, so I'm going to go to you first on that, and I hope that's okay.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things is we need leaders, right? And our youth is going to be the next generation of leaders, and also who are going to be actively in the community doing things for others. So in Huntsville, I see all the organizations that benefit poverty or children. Those are filled with young people. And if 50% of our young generation is dealing with isolation and not wanting to go out and have a sense of purpose, we're going to have a lack of, effort, and we're going to have a missing component in our society.
So need for, I'm actually going to ask each one of you to answer this question, because I think you'll all have a different perspective on this. Nikki.
Yeah, it's, again, important for all of the communities to uplift men, because again, we all exist in this world together. So collaboration is really important when we have healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy men. That translates into people who are mentally and physically healthy in a workplace and in the home. And so it, again, translates not just for them, but for everyone in that community that participate together. We talk about this particularly in our house, that there really are no gender roles. We all do everything. We all live here. And so my kids don't get an allowance. They knew that from the beginning. I said, no one pays me to do the things at the house, so I'm not paying you to do the things at the house. You live here, and you're a part of this community, and we're all going to work on it together. And I think when we do that, everyone is free to thrive, not just exist.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Vic?
Really, nothing to add.
Okay. Lynn? Yes. Okay. Then I'm going to ask each of you for key takeaways and something that you didn't say that you wish you'd had an opportunity. And I'll let any one of you go first.
Well, I'll start by saying helping men, working to make men better, doing things for young men, that doesn't help men. That helps women too. It helps everybody. And so it's in our best interest to help men be better men, women be better women, and then in general we have better families, better fathers, better mothers, better kids. It all works out.
Thank you.
I think the isolation issue that we're reading so much about is real. Now, does that affect a majority of students on a college campus? Well, to some degree, we all have some isolation. But in terms of what we're reading about and talking about, no. But it certainly is a growing issue if you look at the generations. It is mental health and isolation is growing by generation. And to the extent that, and again, research shows this, which makes sense, this is not rocket science per se, but a community, when you're a part of a community, that supports strong mental health. And fraternities will do that for young men at a time when young men are having a more difficult time coming to grips with their mental health. Now, again, that's not to say that most are not mentally healthy. They certainly are. But even those will benefit. Their mental health will benefit by being in a community that encourages, that holds accountable, that helps, they help each other thrive.
Yeah, I'd like to speak specifically to that. Multiple times I've seen my chapter guys deal with real world feelings that normally we would harbor, but we're able to share with others and be able to get through that. Specifically, we had a brother of ours, our chapter passed away in 2022, and that was very hard. And for the guys who were very close to him, that was probably one of the most difficult things they've gone through. And because we had a community of people who we could turn to and talk to, we were able to work through that together and have a mission to support his family, right? If you're not in some type of community, you can't do those things. You can't do them alone. So kind of my final thoughts on that is that men today, they desire to be known by others. And they're looking to fill that hole in their heart with the wrong outlets, and that's ultimately what's causing this isolation we're seeing in guys. And fraternities offer a solution for them to make those meaningful connections and relationships that they're desperately needing. But most importantly, I'd say men need to focus on their relationship with God, their families, and their communities, and fraternities offer a solution for them to start living and learning out that truth.
Yeah, and I would say we don't exist in a silo. We do really depend upon each other, and the other part to that, Wynn touched on this earlier, is that the education is incredibly important to make this happen. So we have done a mental health summit for girls specifically in Girl Scouts, but we added a component for the adults that support them. Because if they don't understand what they're going through, the same thing, then there's no way to support them and to help them actually move through that. And that's a large part of the challenge. So that's why, again, panels like this, more education, it's important for us to understand the benefits of fraternities, of single gender spaces, of why it's important for all of us to, again, coexist and lift each other up.
Thanks. Yeah, and I believe available to everyone who's here in the audience was not only a copy of Wynn Smiley's article in praise of fraternities, but also some of the key data points related to fraternities. So I would urge you to review those. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So I think back to just this past semester, one of my classmates, she made a claim and.
Hold 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm seeing a microphone coming to you, and that will help us get everything recorded. Thank you. Sorry about that.
So thinking back to this past semester in my capstone, one of my classmates made the claim that toxic masculinity is caused by a lack of masculinity. And her argument was, and she used Future Families, which is a database for her research, was that most males prior to the workforce and outside of athletics will only report directly to a female, whether it be in Sunday school or a teacher or your mother being your primary caregiver most of the time. And the lack of most men as a direct authority figure rather than a dean of students or your coach outside of school like you were saying, is constantly, you need to be more like the girls in the classroom, you need to be more like the girls in Sunday school, or you need to calm down so I can get my house chores done. Would you agree with that claim that she made, or would you, if you do, is there a way to maybe change that way of being involved?
Well, I'm not smart enough to agree or disagree with that, but Richard Reeves is. And in his book, Men and Boys, he speaks specifically about that. One of his recommendations is recruiting more men as elementary school teachers and other, where boys, K through 8 maybe, have typically engaged only with women as teachers and other, right? And he would encourage more men to engage in those professions for exactly the reason that you just said.
I would say it's pretty well known that without a proper father figure and a male role model, men tend to fare less.
And you brought up leadership, the need for leaders, seeing those leaders in your community.
Yes. Men need both leaders around them. They need peers that they can look up to that are close to their age, that they can aspire to be. And then they also need guys that are much older that can kind of guide them in things. But they need both, I think, male and female role models in their life to kind of guide them in that.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you all hear me? Okay, good.
Yes.
Irving Montgomery. I work for an organization called Manual Care, which is a men's wellness app. I previously worked for my fraternity's national office. Now I'm volunteer, and I'm also a high school wrestling coach. There's context there. I spend a lot of time around young men, I think 95% of my day. So along with your question, the guys that I encounter have that male impact. I guess my question is, for higher education professionals, it's a female-dominated, career, especially on college campuses. Mrs. Williams, Dawn, like, what's your advice to women working with young men, and how can they, I guess, better connect?
I'm going to turn it back to the panel.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, for me, it's just being really honest. And so I will tell you, conversations with my boys are very different than conversations with girls at that age. But it's being honest. Again, really trying to dispel stereotypes where you can. I think part of that is really important in making sure that they know there's any option that they want. And so my boys, they've had a couple of male teachers, and honestly, the years that they had male teachers were best years of school for them. And I attribute that to them feeling freer and an opportunity to be themselves and not feel like they were put in a box. And so we talk about how that benefited you, why it would be important for you to want to do this. Again, both of my kids also play sports, and my oldest already knows what he wants to do, coaching, and that he wants to do, and all the things that he wants to have as a part of a team that he didn't have. So the conversation we have is have those conversations with your leaders. There's no reason you can't say this is what would help in our particular environment, in our community. It also teaches them an opportunity, as you said, for agency, to really have some ownership. There's a level, again, my oldest is 15. I'm not going to have a conversation with the coach or even the teacher. You know the expectations, and you need to have that. If there's a moment I need to get involved, then I will. But I think the more that we can have them advocate for themselves, learn and see around them what really helps them and what they benefit from, having those conversations with their peers, and then being able to talk about it.
You're the one in a million parent.
I
love you. I love you. Okay.
No, that's why the education of parents is so important, because this is not the normal case. You're right.
I always say to my boys, like, would you ever want us to call the principal, the coach? You should never want that. That's
no.
like, you can do that. You're not a little baby. Get in there, but that's not what happens.
No, and that's why it's important really to have those conversations, just what you said, Wynn. I mean, I honestly think those conversations should start in elementary school with parents, understanding what the expectations are and really giving them a little bit more agency with every year that they move through. It's important.
And I guess as follow-up, since you asked my thought on this as well, there was actually an article this past week in the Chronicle of Higher Education. It was an op-ed in the response to Charlie Kirk's murder, and the author of that article posited that it was important for campus administrators and faculty to serve all students, and made the argument that campus administration may be serving. And this is the article, but I think it applies to this conversation, that campus administrators may lean towards serving a particular group over another group. And from my own perspective, I guess the line would be that all students matter.
Well, and I think when you talk about single gender spaces, Dawn, again, boys and girls learn differently in a whole lot of ways. And when we in co-ed environments, when we try to be everything to everyone, we end up being nothing to anyone. And so it's not an opportunity for anyone to really thrive.
I have a quick question, and then we'll pass it on over. Morgan Martinez, I was a Theta Phi chapter at University of the Pacific, and I'm a part of our alumni association. And so for me, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of what alumni and older men and women can do for students, especially in single-sex organizations, and what that means for first-generation college students as well. Where I went, my best friend, who's still my best friend from Theta, her parents didn't go to college, her brothers and sisters didn't go to college. And Theta really gave her a grounding of learning about college. So I wanted to hear more about that on the fraternity side.
Yeah, so we disconnected from the single advisor model 30 years ago and have typically a group of men. It doesn't have to be men. We have some board of trustees, that's what we call them, members who are women, but the vast majority are men, and the vast majority are alumni of ATO that help advise our chapters. And that engagement, not only in just chapter operations, but just in terms of what's it like to be someone who's in the professional world as a man. What's happened since you graduated? What will be helpful for me to know as an undergraduate moving into the real world, so to speak. And I think that those connections are very helpful. It is very difficult to have a mentoring-mentee relationship without topics for them to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So just, hey, I'd love to be a mentor. Hey, I'd love to have a mentor. Great, let's connect you two. And if there are not topics for those two men to talk about, and college undergraduate and the alum in many cases, that falls apart pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But when they have something to talk about, we've discovered, like chapter operations, so the president has the chairman of the board, they're the connector, right? So they always have the chapter to talk about, but then other issues could come up. So it's really important from a men's standpoint to have topics between the mentor and the mentee, so because a natural conversation is not necessarily going to happen naturally, right? They need something to talk about.
Any other questions? Yes.
Arthur Jones II, education reporter, ABC News. I just want to thank you all for this panel today. I grew up in the city. I attended to an all-boys school. Then I played football in college, so I know the all-male environment very well, of course. My sister, though, was a Golden Award for the Girl Scouts.
Yes.
She went to an all-male women's college, all-women's college in New York City. So I see both sides of this argument. As an education reporter, though, I was here to look at college enrollment for young men. And can you expound on how much male teachers play in young men actually attending college and thriving in schools?
I'll speak on a personal anecdote with this. The main reason why I decided to go to university to study mechanical engineering was a high school mentor who helped me all throughout freshman to senior year. So I think having somebody who can encourage you to go for higher education and pursue your master's and do this, it's undervalued. And I know the guys in my fraternity and the men I know right now, my church, if they have somebody they can look up to that wants the best for them, they're going to ultimately more likely go to a university and pursue a degree.
And I'm not sure if I shared this data point at the beginning, and if I did, it's certainly worth repeating. In the next 5 years, for every man who graduates college, we expect 2 women graduates. And so that is a profound difference from where this has been.
Well, let me add, so a fraternity system on a campus attracts men to come to that campus, right? And so especially we're looking at the demographic cliff. We've all read about the demographic cliff, right? 18 years ago, people quit having babies. And so now that's coming to fruition. And so especially smaller institutions of higher education are looking at a real issue as it relates to incoming students. And for all the reasons that we've talked about, boys, high school graduating seniors are not as likely to attend college because they don't think they're going to be successful. Is one big reason. The Wall Street Journal wrote a big article about this a couple of years ago. And so if I'm a higher education administrator at a smaller college where I also already have a demographic issue, I want to attract more boys, high school graduating seniors. How do I do that? Well, one way is to have a supportive and functional fraternity system on campus, because that attracts men. And Dawn had mentioned the difference between the women enrollees in undergraduate level and the men. 60-40 is on average, but unless you're in a Division I school, that gap is growing. And then the last thing I'll say about this, the research is very clear on this, that fraternity men and sorority women have 2 to 3 to 4 times more likely to graduate and graduate on time than unaffiliated folks. So if I'm an administrator and I want to make sure that my incoming freshman graduates, stays in school and graduates, I want them to join an organization, and fraternities and sororities have demonstrated that we keep men and women in college through graduation and graduating on time.
In the sheet of data points that you all have, there's an article, Pike, I think it's Pike, it's actually Pike and Weiss 2024, but it looks at more than 20 years of research that has reaffirmed that those who join fraternities and sororities are more likely to be retained and to graduate. And often the critique on that is that, well, perhaps that's reflected because of a lack of socioeconomic diversity. And actually, the study was controlled for that. And it is not about socioeconomic differences between the students. It literally is looking at, did you join a fraternity or a sorority? And that is going to make you more likely to be retained and graduate.
Can I just add? And so the Southeast SEC, Vice President for Student Affairs just did a research study at SEC schools, and they were looking at the benefit of first-generation and low-income students, men in particular, at their institutions and the fraternity's impact on them. And what they found is that first-generation men and lower-income students going through fraternity had better learning outcomes than unaffiliated men who were first-generation or low-income. So there is now, the SEC has this. I anticipate that we'll see additional research on this. So this stereotype that fraternity is for the rich really has never been true. But it's certainly, when we see a lot of this, first-generation students and low-income students, the diversity on socioeconomic issues is very broad in fraternities. And I would say this SEC study would confirm that we're benefiting first-gen and low-income students.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Ellis from the Wall Street Journal, but not behind the article that you mentioned. We've talked a lot about college life, and it's been super interesting, but I'm just sort of curious, too, about new graduates who are entering the workforce and your perspectives on what supports, if any, are needed for young men who are making that transition, and any strategies that you've found to be particularly effective.
Yeah, so from a fraternity standpoint, the networking issue, which has been a benefit of fraternities since time immemorial, continues to be a benefit, right? And so not only the network with each other, so the internal fraternal networks of just, whose parents know and they know each other and their friends and that kind of thing within the chapter itself, but more importantly, the network of alumni. Right, and so one of the things that undergraduates will typically do, will look for alumni in their major or where they want to work professionally or want to start out professionally, and they'll have an ability to reach out to that alum or those alumni and say, hey, I'm an ATO too, great, let's have a conversation. And so those networks naturally happen, and in many cases, in many chapters, the chapters work to develop those networks. So I think that network piece is really a leg up for graduating seniors.
Yeah, agreed. And don't forget the power of internships that happen during that college time as well, because that does create an opportunity professionally for connections and mentorship that extend beyond when they graduate as well.
Yeah, and I would say the NESE survey, which Dawn and I quoted as it relates to retention, also showed that affiliated students, sorority women, fraternity men, are more likely to engage in internships as undergraduates.
And if you're not familiar with the NESE survey, it's the National Survey on Student Engagement. The data, the sample size on that is more than 200,000 students. So it's a pretty healthy sample. And I know there's at least one national fraternity that offers internships as part of what they offer for their undergraduate members. Other questions?
For being such an open book. I'm a reporter on the higher education system. A statistic.
Much better.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you all for being such an open book. I'm a reporter on the higher education system. A statistic that you read out earlier, Dr. Weiss, really stuck with me. 98% of mass shooters are male. They're not just male, they're young men. They're being radicalized somewhere, and we've seen that with Charlie Kirk's assassin. We saw that with Thomas Matthew Crooks, the attempted assassin on the president. Luigi Mangione is another example, the assassin of the United Healthcare CEO. So these young men are being radicalized somewhere. whether it's social media, maybe the education system, they're being radicalized somewhere. Where do we go from here? Are there real-world solutions that we can implement to eradicate this among young men? I know, tough. I apologize, but we have to bring up the real world.
Just a small question. Just a small question.
I heard a little bit from Cadis on that. Do you mind starting on that one? Because I did hear you touch a little bit on that.
So I think the biggest thing is guys are looking at the wrong outlets, right? They're constantly being fed false information of what's important through social media, video games, pornography, and they're filling their desires. I would say the best way to describe it is being thirsty and drinking salt water, right? So you start with that, and those kind of snowball into these guys feeling isolated and being stuck inside. So without a proper outlet, I think they get caught up in all these thoughts inside, and they don't have the proper ability to communicate with others. And I think most of the people that are taking out violence and doing hate right now that are young men just want somebody to talk to. Like, I guarantee you most of those guys haven't had somebody ask you, how are you doing? And if they were told, I would love you more, like, I'd imagine they wouldn't want to share such hate.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that and circle back to what I said earlier. I think it starts from the very beginning. And I think really the onus is on the education of the adults in their lives. That helps because if we can have, again, healthier, more mentally stable young men and young women, they're going to be healthier, more mentally stable adults when they hit to move into college. And you can see the statistics change across the board. That's a really pie in the sky answer, right? Because if we could do that, we probably would have already done that. But I think if we can create other opportunities for education for the adults, have, again, more male influences, positive male influences early on for boys, give them an opportunity to really express themselves freely and openly, have emotional support from the very beginning, I think you'll see a very different outcome.
I'd refer you to the research of Dr. Jean Twenge at San Diego State University. She is probably the foremost researcher on mental impact on adolescents as it relates to all kinds of things, but really focused on the iPhone and social media. And so things like isolation, and when you're isolated, you go to things like this, which makes you even more isolated, so on and so forth, to Cadis's point. But I think her research has provides some insight. I don't know that it speaks to the specific question you answered, but these are, if you would ever, you look at her research, shocking what happened to mental health of adolescents when the iPhone was introduced.
And I think we're seeing this even more now with online gambling and information that's pushed to young men in particular who seem to be dealing with this more than women. Information pushed to them through their phones to encourage. Thank you to our panelists, to our audience, to Lafayette Company for bringing us together, to the Fraternity Forward Coalition, which ultimately has brought this to you, fraternityforward.org. Our panelists will be here for a few minutes if other folks in the audience have questions, and if we could give them a hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome job.
It's fun being up here with you.